I'm Kevin. Welcome to this episode of Windshield Time. Imagine you're at the beach. A soft ocean breeze blowing on shore, the warmth of the sun, the smell of the salt air, the gentle crashing of the waves. It's beautiful. Except you're afraid of the ocean. So you steel yourself, you summon your courage, and you wade in, just up to your ankles at first. Then, somewhat emboldened by the reassuring feel of the firm sand beneath your feet, you wade in up to your shins, perhaps even your knees. As you stand there, enjoying the experience for a moment, until a wave comes in and knocks you ever so slightly off balance. You step back, you regain your footing, and then step forward again to where you were standing before, just in time to get buffeted by yet another wave. And this process repeats itself a few more times until just as you regain your footing from the last one, a 4-foot breaker smacks you squarely in the face and chest and sends you tumbling backwards. You scramble to your feet, your nose is full of salt water, your butt cracks full of sand. Yep, this is why I don't like the ocean. And that's when you notice someone out there, just beyond the breakers. Their head is barely above the surface, bobbing up and down, peaceful as can be. But how can that be? Well, the water out there is way over their head. They can't possibly be safe. And yet, they seem completely undisturbed. Blissful even. What's that about? Maybe the answer has something to do with the difference between safety and security. Because standing there in the shallows, you have something the person in the deep does not. You can touch bottom. But who keeps getting knocked over? I've been thinking about that paradox. You see, we tend to associate safety with having something firm beneath our feet, something familiar, predictable, something we can depend upon. We want to know where we stand. But perhaps the shallows offer only the illusion of safety. After all, the shallows are precisely where the waves break. That person out there beyond the breakers has surrendered the very thing that we thought made us safe. They can't touch bottom, and yet they've discovered something we haven't. They don't need to. Of course, there's one small problem with getting from the shallows to the deep. You have to get through the breakers, and that can be one hell of a ride. Our instinct is often to resist them. We brace ourselves against the wave and try to hold our ground, or as it approaches, we might turn our back to it or try to jump over it. Sometimes that works. Often, not so much. I learned a long time ago that there's another way through a breaking wave. Dive into it. Not away from it, not over it, right into the curl. It requires commitment. You can't really half dive into a wave. You see it coming. You know you're not going over it this time. One big breath, and you dive. Not halfway, not tentatively. You dive directly into the curl of the very thing that moments before you were bracing yourself against. For a few seconds, everything changes. The roar of the surf becomes strangely muted. That force that threatened to knock you down passes almost peacefully over and around you. And then you emerge on the other side. The wave is still the wave. You didn't stop it. You didn't defeat it. And you certainly didn't affirm it back into the nothingness from whence it came. No, you went through it. There's an old saying, what we resist persists. Standing in the surf makes that rather literal. Our resistance doesn't create the waves. It simply keeps us standing where the waves are breaking. And I wonder how often we do that exact thing in life. We brace against what is. We resist the loss, the heartbreak, the change, the uncertainty. We keep trying to hold our ground, believing that if we can just stand firmly enough, life will eventually stop coming at us. But sometimes moving beyond the breakers requires something other than endurance. It requires commitment. Dive right in. Not because the thing we fear isn't real, not because it won't hurt, not because we've convinced ourselves that everything is fine when clearly it isn't, but because sometimes the only way beyond something is directly through it. And I wonder if that isn't what transcendence often feels like. We've left something behind that no longer works for us, but we haven't quite reached whatever comes next. We're in the breakers. It can be tempting to turn around. See, I knew I shouldn't have left the shallows, but turbulence doesn't necessarily mean we're going the wrong way. Sometimes it simply means we're crossing a threshold. Transcendence isn't learning how to stand more securely in the shallows. It isn't getting better at anticipating every wave. Sometimes transcendence means discovering that we no longer need the bottom. Which raises an obvious question. If you can't touch bottom, can you swim? Well, looking back over my life, I've come to realize something. I'm a pretty damn good swimmer, and I suspect you are too. Think about it. How many times has life tossed you into water you had absolutely no intention of entering? A relationship ended, the passing of your beloved, you lost a job or a career, something you were absolutely certain would work, didn't. Life changed the rules without bothering to consult you first. And somehow, you swam. Maybe not gracefully. Maybe there was some dog paddling involved. Maybe your technique would not have impressed the Olympic judges. But you're here. You're here. Somehow, something in you knew what to do next. And then what to do after that. Maybe not 10 strokes ahead. Just the next one. And the next. There's real security in recognizing that. Not, nothing bad will ever happen to me, but whatever happens, I know I'm okay, and I'll be okay. Perhaps that's the difference between the illusion of safety and true security. Safety says, I'm okay because I can touch bottom. Security says, I'm okay even when I can't. There's something else hidden in our desire to touch bottom, of course. Certainty. We like knowing exactly where the bottom is. As I explore separately in my essay, Certainty and Clarity, we discover that certainty and clarity are not the same thing. Certainty wants to touch bottom, but sometimes there's simply no bottom within reach. And perhaps security doesn't require one. Now look again at that person out there beyond the breakers. There's something odd. They're not swimming. They're floating. Oh. Mark Nepo writes in the Book of Awakening, when we stop struggling, we float. That changes things, doesn't it? Because discovering that we can swim is one thing. Discovering that we don't always have to is something else entirely. Swimming requires effort, and sometimes effort is exactly what's called for. Sometimes there is somewhere to go, something to do, a next stroke that is ours to take. But floating asks something different of us. Surrender. To float, we have to stop fighting the water long enough to discover something we could never discover while thrashing around trying to save ourselves. The deep knows how to hold us. Perhaps there's a progression here. First, I need to touch bottom. Then, I discover I can swim. Then, I discover I can float. And eventually, I discover I am held. In fact, not only am I am held by the very deep I so feared. What we feared might consume us turns out to be what we can trust to hold us. And now I find myself wondering whether being a pretty damn good swimmer means something different than I once thought. Maybe it isn't simply that I've developed an impressive set of skills for navigating life. Maybe something deeper has been present all along. Have you ever watched someone who doesn't really know how to swim suddenly find themselves in water over their head? They kick, they reach, they dog pedal. It may not be pretty, but something instinctive takes over. Something knows. Something deep inside us knows. I wonder how often that has happened in our own lives. We encountered something we'd never encountered before, with no instruction manual, no carefully developed skill set for handling it, and somehow something arose, strength we didn't know we had, words we hadn't rehearsed, an intuition we couldn't explain, the next thing to do, and then the next, and then the next. Perhaps life has been perhaps life has been expressing through us and as us all along. Sometimes that expression looks like diving. Sometimes it looks like swimming. Sometimes it looks like floating. Perhaps wisdom is learning to discern which is ours to do. None of this means the deep is without risk. Storms still come. Currents change. Waves happen. Life is still life. Security doesn't mean believing that nothing difficult will ever happen. It means we no longer require the ocean to remain perfectly still before we're willing to enter it. We trust ourselves enough to dive when commitment is called for. We trust our capacity to swim when action is ours to take. And we trust enough to float when the invitation is simply to surrender. Perhaps eventually we begin to recognize something deeper still. The life we've been trusting to carry us may be the very same life that has been expressing through us and as us all along. It's all life. Maybe that person beyond the breakers knows something we didn't know when we first stepped tentatively into that water. We thought they couldn't possibly be safe because they couldn't touch bottom. Maybe we're asking the wrong question. Maybe what they had discovered wasn't safety after all. It was security. We spend so much of our lives searching for firmer ground, more certainty, more control, someplace we can finally plant both feet and say, there, now I'm safe. But perhaps life was never meant to be lived entirely in the shallows. Perhaps security was never about finding a place where the water couldn't move us. Perhaps it was about discovering that we can move with the water, that we can dive, that we can swim, we can float, that we are held. In the shallows, we trust the bottom. But out there, out beyond the breakers, we learn to trust the deep. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Kevin Rubel, the Practical Iconoclast. And this is Windshield Time, where you come to get your answers questioned. If today's reflection resonated with you, I'd love to hear what came up for you. And I'd love to have you join me again on this journey called Authentic Life.